Hi everyone, it's the evening of the 26th of July 2022. I'm with Jake. Jake has a podcast called Bitcoin with Jake on Spotify. And I just wanted to have a conversation. What is Bitcoin for people that have no idea about it? First of all, I just wanted to everyone has their unique journey to Bitcoin. And I'll do a synopsis of mine, like very quickly. So I had a business degree. I went into business, thought I knew really well how the financial system worked. And the GFC came and totally blindsided me. And then I went in a journey for years and years to try and work out what happened, how to avoid it the next time. And I went into a few rabbit holes and I found Bitcoin. So it's bigger than that, my story, but that's basically how I got to Bitcoin. So how did you get to Bitcoin, Jake?
Well, thank you for asking the question. It's funny.
You usually ask the questions,
yeah,
right?
I'm about 30 episodes into Bitcoin with Jake now, and that's essentially the question I ask everyone
Oh, really?
on the show. So I have entrepreneurs, authors, investors, normal people, a whole eclectic range of different characters from all over the world that are spending a huge proportion of their waking time working on Bitcoin, teaching people about Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, selling Bitcoin, doing all sorts of stuff with it. So it's to me, it's the most interesting subject you could engage with at this point in time, and it's really caught my attention. There's no quick answer necessarily to like what's the
It
journey.
doesn't need to be quick. Yep.
I feel like there's generally kind of like a bunch of touch points that people have, and I'm pretty similar to that general story. So shout out to my friend Dan Burke in Singapore, 2015. I was living and working there. Dan was into Bitcoin. He's like, Jake, you got to look at this stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. And long story short, bought some, and that was in December of 2015, and the prices were, let's say, $300-400 a Bitcoin. And so with a very small percentage of my portfolio, I decided to buy some basically on a whim. And at the time it was this blockchain thing. You got to learn about that, and this whole concept of like a different type of technology that hadn't existed before. And so yeah, I thought, fuck it, let's buy some. 2016, markets popped up, made a bunch of profit, sold some to go on holiday with my now wife in Japan. And 2017, again, the market carried on pushing, and I sold some more to go traveling in South America. And really, I had no idea what I'd bought. I just was riding that particular hype cycle, and what I now know as the halvening process, when the supply of Bitcoin that arrives in the market over the course of the year gets halved, essentially. And in 2017, there was then another, there was like a scary thing going on essentially in Bitcoin, where there was a big discussion in the community about the size of block and whether or not it should be changed in order to incorporate some other people's interests. And it's now known as what's called the block size war. But I didn't know a lot about Bitcoin at the time. I was a purely speculative owner and seller of this stuff. And I read a couple of high-level articles that were, will Bitcoin survive the hard fork that's about to happen? And the truth was, we didn't know. And I'd doubled my money or something. And I'm like, you're an idiot if you don't take a load more cash off the table here. So I sold some more. And between December 2015 and that summer of 2017, I sold 75% of my initial investment. There was then a market crash, early 2018, and everyone thought it was all over. I say everyone. A lot of people thought it was all over, but I kind of got dragged in by that. Luckily, I didn't sell the remaining 25%. And I was at the time I was in the technology space. So I was working in startups, or trying to set up my own companies. And And so I had lots of friends or acquaintances that were interested in Bitcoin, and crypto was like more of a wider discussion, to be honest. And there were still like technology accelerators and venture capitalists that wanted to deploy funds into blockchain, and how can we do it in a more energy efficient way, or what can we tokenize, or how different will the world look in an environment where you can have multi-stake ownership of assets. That was kind of interesting, but I kind of forgot about it all in a way, and it fell to the side. And then 2020, and I basically fell madly in love with it again. I'd forgotten about it, and that was largely because of the huge stimulus package that we saw from the Federal Reserve, and a YouTube video, like pretty straightforward, to be honest. I remember it very specifically. The title is Bitcoin Infiltrates Corporate America, and it was Raoul Pal interviewing Michael Saylor. It's 2 hours long, and it was just brilliant. And it was Saylor's synopsis on how do I ensure that 100 years from now, the person running my company has the best possible chance of success. I'm going to buy, at the time he put $200 or $300 million worth of his cash reserves into Bitcoin. I'm like, holy shit, that's insane. It's stock listed, fully regulated American company has just bought a shitload of this stuff. What does that mean? And so, yeah, it's probably the last 2 years been a huge, let's say, it sucks up all my time. I talk about it all the time. I talk to my friends and family about it, trying to persuade them to buy it, look into it, learn about it. And that's really what the trigger was seeing someone who I could put my faith behind, that has done some genuine research and has then taken big career risk, essentially. You go, okay, that's really interesting. So yeah, that's kind of my story to where we're at today. There's a few more pieces that I might just drop in that are interesting in that. Sadly, my father died when I was 20 years old, and so I inherited some money. And one of the challenges you have when you have a pot of money is you want to pass it on to the next generation. Okay, how do you do that? Yeah. In an inflationary environment, cash is not your friend. You cannot store value over time. If you put your 10 grand in the bank, in 10 years time, you can buy a fraction of the amount of purchasing power of today. So you're forced into investing, but saving and investing are not synonymous. And so I have been for over 10 years now looking at ways to invest, and have invested in a number of asset classes. So physical real estate, all the different public markets using financial advisors and wealth management services, also early stage private equity deals and startups, so angel investing, and lastly crypto / now Bitcoin. And so yeah, it's caught my attention to the extent that of my investable assets or liquid investable assets, 50% Bitcoin today. Like absolutely,
no, really?
We're going massive. Yeah, absolutely. It's the most exciting thing you can put your money into, and really, it's the first time in the history of man you can actually own what you own. So the way that a Bitcoin can be stored using self-custody, you're the only person in the world that can access that Bitcoin account, which means you're the only person in the world that can send that value anywhere, which means you're the only person that can spend it. You cannot have it taken off you unless someone kind of opens your brain up and takes your seed phrase out. In the past, if you owned gold, people could steal it off you, or if you owned a house or a car, someone could say it was theirs, not yours. Or equally, you could suffer from fraud in the stock market. Any number of different things can go wrong. So yeah, I'll stop talking at that point because I'm very passionate about the subject. But yeah, there's so many things that bring you to the table, and yeah, just to connect the dots there. So I was always interested in investing very long term, and hearing Michael Saylor talk about Bitcoin the way he did, I was like, that's what I've been looking for like over a decade. Holy shit, what is this stuff? And that's why, so like the dots were all kind of lining up essentially to then come together and go, okay, you really need to pay a lot more attention to this. What actually is Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's my journey's been similar, especially to try and retain wealth in Australia, because I think we are not managed well, the government's not managing our money well. So it's something that's based on the US dollar. And that was my initial go into Bitcoin. But what I struggle with, because I'm over 50, so for me to go into Bitcoin was a huge learning process, because the whole way of doing it, just like its energy, like I really struggled with the whole concept. But now I've got it. It's taken me a while. What if someone came up to you at a dinner party and said to you and asked you, what is Bitcoin? How do you answer it?
It's money.
Succinctly and clearly? I always like fumble. I try to like talk to my brother about it, because I'm like, you have to get in. And I just fumble with it and I don't deliver well. So what would you say?
Well, the first, yeah, as I just meant, it's money. It's money. That's all it is. It's money. And then when someone asks the question, well, what is money? Well, that's then a huge subject, because there's multiple different answers to what is money.
Yeah.
The phrase that I like to talk about is the double coincidence of wants. And this is something that has been studied for actually many years. And then the saleability, the most saleable good becomes money. Austrian economics is not a space that I was taught, and frankly was like completely ignored by the business school I went through, which is interesting in itself. But long story short, Bitcoin is money, and money is what facilitates trade between humans and is a technology in itself. If we didn't have money, we would still be in a barter economy. So I might have a cow, you might have that tree that's sitting behind you. I want the tree. How do I get the tree without chopping my cow in half? Yes. We need something in between to facilitate that transaction. And it's one of the most powerful ways of basically the network effect that is humans, and our trade systems, our education and intelligence that we've built over the generations is facilitated by technology like money. But I mean, this is immediately something that's almost way too complex to talk about at a dinner party. So yeah, look, Bitcoin's money, it's digital money, and will be the base layer of the future economy of the world, in my opinion. There's also that point, isn't there, where, you know, the phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. Bitcoin solves a lot of different problems. And I'd like to try and think about, okay, who has asked me, you know, what is Bitcoin? It's like, okay, well, what problems does this person have? Now, if they're in Sydney and they're asking you what is Bitcoin, then what is the Australian inflation rate today? Maybe 5%, not that big a problem. Let's say you were in Canada and you were somehow connected to the Canadian truckers that were fighting for their freedoms in what should have been an open and liberal democracy, had their bank accounts frozen. Well, you've suddenly got a very serious problem where the government's dictating what you can and can't say and think. Okay, what's a different network or system I can utilize to transfer value to people? Bitcoin. Okay, well, if it was a Canadian trucker, I might have talked about the fact that you could self-custody Bitcoin and send it to anyone in the world, providing you had their Bitcoin address and not have it taken off you. Okay, that solves the problem. On the other side of that could be going to countries like Argentina or Lebanon, where they're suffering from hyperinflation, Venezuela, Turkey. You know, the cash that they get paid to go to an hour's work every day is disintegrating at half, if not more, in certain parts of the world. So Bitcoin with a fixed cap of 21 million is in theory a great defense against inflationary currencies. So yes, so whoever you're sat next to at the dinner party, sit back and think, okay, what does this person have a problem with on a day-to-day basis? And then perhaps that's a good way to talk to them about what Bitcoin is. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the flip side of all of that is people will work it out when they work it out. And if they haven't worked it out yet, not your problem.
Yeah. The only thing I find is people are obsessed with the price. So we went from, I don't know what it was, 90,000 Australian for a coin. I think, was that the height of?
Yeah, 69,000 US. I don't know what that is in Aussie.
Yeah, it was around 80, like 89, 90, something like that. And then it's plunged. So it's plunged down to 30 Australian dollars.
31 or something today, yeah.
30, is it? 31. I used to check it like 5 times a day, and now I'm like, I don't want to check it. So it gets to the point where, you know, I'm sure people are laughing behind my back with the big price plunge. I know, you know, my son has a go at me my 17-year-old son, like, how's Bitcoin going?
Yeah.
So, but once you know about it and you're so, you know, there's different reasons for it. I don't care about the price. I just want it to succeed, because if Bitcoin doesn't succeed in this world, I am just devastated for my kids. We need something that's decentralized, that governments can't control, that we can do peer-to-peer to keep everyone else in check. So that's where I have this, like, people can't get beyond the price of it. And how did you get beyond that? Because you paid a certain amount, then you sold it, you went on holidays. When did you switch, when it wasn't about the money anymore?
Well,
Or
it's still, I mean, I'll be blunt, it's still about the money. Yeah. Like I'm a rational human. I'm self-interested. I believe Bitcoin is the fastest horse that you can store value in out of every other possible object you can put money into out there today. And therefore I'm buying it. And I'm buying it with as big a percentage I feel I can take risk with. If it goes to zero, I'll still be just about okay. But if it does 10, 100x, well, I'm going to be doing fucking great. Now, in an environment in which this asset not only has this brilliant kind of number go up virality to it, it also is potentially the most liberating technology humans have ever had at their fingertips, because the fact is money has always been under the whim of whoever essentially the biggest gangster is in town.
yeah.
And the monopoly on violence that modern economies have and modern governments is quite extraordinary. I mean, I moved to Australia in December 2019. Within 4 months, I was locked in my house. Fucking insane for a disease that, you know, still hasn't even got close to killing 1% of people.
Yeah.
You know? And if you said anything to the contrary of what the general rhetoric was, you were some like heathen conspiracy theorist who needed to be, you know, pushed under the carpet and told to shut up. This was an extraordinary attack on people's liberty.
Mm.
Now, how was that possible? Well, it was possible because of an extraordinary amount of ineptness, and just people are thick, so thick. But throw into the mix self-interest, and then you've got pharmaceutical companies that they survive and make money because of disease. Okay, well, how do they make more money? Whoa, what a surprise! They create some more disease, or they make the disease sound worse than it is, and a lot of it is facilitated by the ability to print money.
Mm.
So when you start peeling back the onion a bit, what is a central bank? Well, central bank is effectively, it's a money printer. This is the description that's used. There is a group of people in Australia today, in America, being the most important central bank in the world, arguably the most important institution in the world, or
Yeah.
most influential, where there's 7 billion people on the planet, and a handful of them have the ability to just create their own cash. So they don't have to go to work, they don't have to create anything, they don't have to make anything, they don't have to sell anything. They literally have to just press a button. And as what happened in 2020, 6 trillion US dollars was created out of nowhere. Like,
Mm.
what the hell just happened there? So if you can print your own money, then inevitably you use it with your friends, with your family, for people that are close by to you, for your own benefit. That is a natural human instinct. So Bitcoin as a neutral and, as you mentioned, importantly, decentralized monetary network, it can't be changed by anyone regardless of their portfolio percentage. So let's say someone owns 50% of Bitcoin, they still can't change the rules. This is
Mm.
a thing that's never happened before. So as you mentioned, there are sadly threats to liberty around the world.
Mm.
And a lot of that, in my opinion, is funded by the ability to print money. And so if that ability to print money is removed, well, then how do they actually pay for the police force? How do they pay for an army? How do they pay to keep you in your house? Well, they're bankrupt. They can't. There's only one way out of the situation modern governments are in today. You know, looking at GDP ratios to debt of over 130% in a lot of countries. And if you look at the history books, a country that reaches debt to GDP ratio of 130% or more, they go bankrupt. So modern governments have pretty much only one decision to make: go bankrupt or print more money. And so it's this kind of weird death spiral of addiction. And that is at the point where it's so much more than the money. So yes, I think Bitcoin has incredible upside. And you listen to some professional traders, they talk about risk reward ratios of things like numbers they've never even fathomed in their life. They're like, well, the risk that it goes down 50% is definitely there. So that's maybe 30,000 Australian dollars to 15,000.
Yeah.
But it could also, 15x from here, largely because they're going to print more money. And where's the money going to go? Well, it's going to go into an asset that is a fixed supply. And as a result, you have a big demand push, and it'll get squeezed and the price will go up even more. So yeah, it's a fascinating kind of amalgamation of different forces and different scenarios. Yeah.
I do think it's still correlated to equities, because so if they push the interest rates up too far and tighten, I do think the possibility is that it could go down more.
Yep.
But that's buying opportunity for everyone. And
the other thing I would say straight away to that, Sonia, is not just is this it fundamentally changes what ownership is. So what does it mean to own something? I own this car. Well, do you? Well, yeah, you have a piece of paper that says you own the car, but actually 80% of it is debt to BMW, and you've got to pay a certain coupon on that debt for the next 5 years, or actually they just take it off you. Or this is my house. Okay, show me the ownership document. Okay, but it says that a government has basically issued you the right to reside on this property, and it's 200 square meters within some kind of urban area that you don't know where your water comes from, you don't know where your food comes from, you don't know, whether your drainage goes, you have no idea, basically. I mean, you've farmed out responsibility for all of these skills to someone else. And the truth is that, you probably have 80%, or let's say you have a loan to value of 50% with your mortgage. Well, what happens if you start paying your mortgage payments? It gets reclaimed. You don't own the property. Do you own it? I don't know. Whereas if you have Bitcoin and you self-custody it using your own hardware wallet, maybe using multi-sig, which is even better, where you have 3 keys and you need to have 2 of 3 to actually access it and move it anywhere. If it goes down 50%, you still own it. If you leave the country and move to another part of the world, you still own it. If the jurisdiction you live in decides they don't like your politics and you get on a plane and leave, your wealth goes with you. The very core of this is basically the model for ownership has changed forever. And this is when people talk about, in the Bitcoin space, talk about shit coins. Now, this could be a new cryptocurrency, but equally, like physical real estate is actually a durable consumer good. The reason people keep their money in real estate is because it's comparatively done well to inflationary currencies over time. But actually, there's hugely egregious kind of friction costs with real estate. So you've got to pay for real estate agents, you've got to pay for OPEX, you've got to pay for any taxation. So, the stamp duty, every time you buy the house, 5% to the government, 5%. Capital gains on the whole thing, income tax on any yield you create. Like, the governments are taking every single penny they can off a real estate investor, and they're still doing okay. So it is about more than the money, but the money is an important, or the price, shall we say, is an important marketing tool, because at our core, we are all greedy, and somehow appealing to greed is, whether or not Satoshi, the guy, girl group that set up this incredible invention, discovery, even there's a subject over that, whether they envisaged this being the case, who knows? But it is how it's playing out. So I find the whole thing very interesting.
And that's, just something that's in the news at the moment is Sri Lanka. That's a perfect example of a government just mismanaging everything. Everything's thrown into chaos. God knows what the currency is there. I don't know what it is at the moment, even if they're accepting notes. But if you had Bitcoin, your wealth is still there.
Mm.
and you can flee the country if that's what you want to do. You can't really, like gold, you have to sort of lug in a bag. I don't really get the gold thing. Do you get gold? And the
Not well, now that Bitcoin exists, I don't see any point in buying gold. Like,
yeah.
I know of gold bugs that, basically people who are extremely interested in gold. I interviewed a guy called Larry Lepard recently, and he's 65-year-old American investor. He's done everything from venture capital stuff to private equity, and public markets, and he's basically had a sound money thesis. So he's been looking at inflationary economies for however many years he's been doing it, and he had a big bet in 2011 or whatever it was that gold was like everyone's going to retreat to gold. But what he's subsequently realized, and that's what teed him up to become a Bitcoiner, which is cool, is the gold market's incredibly manipulated. And I raised the point with him, well, isn't that because gold actually has to sit in a vault? And most gold trades that are done, the vast majority of them, and at a larger multiple of derivatives are traded on top of physical gold. Like none of it ever actually gets exchanged. Whereas that's not the case with Bitcoin. Like you don't need a paper market on top of Bitcoin in the same way you do with gold, because you don't have to carry around in your back pocket. Like how do you carry gold bullion around? Like
Yeah.
someone might steal
And
it
then
off you, or
shave a little bit off.
you can't divide it into a small enough piece. Like
Yeah.
I would not be buying gold anytime soon. Saying that, I do think it still remains a store of value, and a lot of people still believe in gold, and it has historically done very well over thousands of years, as the most pristine money humans have had until now. But to go back to Sri Lanka for a second,
Yeah.
I don't know anything about the specifics of that scenario, so I'm not going to comment on that. But some things I can mention, which are very, very exciting, is when you look at some fundamental elements to Bitcoin, for example, adoption. So how many people are actually using this thing? Well, it's very, very clear that adoption is increasing. And there's some interesting points to this. So first and foremost, I interviewed another guy recently called Brian Estes, and Brian is a fund manager investing into largely Bitcoin, but some other crypto as well. And he is effectively a specialist in something called S-curve technologies. So he went to Cambridge in the late 80s when I was born, and he studied something called the S-curve.
God.
Yeah, 1988 born. And an S-curve is essentially the adoption rate of new technologies. So when you look at the adoption rate of cars, or you look at the adoption rate of mobile phones, that's probably the easiest example, is modern mobiles. The first mobile that turns up, it's like a fuck off brick. You can't carry it around. It's so expensive. Who the hell's going to use that? And it takes, let's say, roughly speaking, a decade to go from 0 to 10% adoption of the total population. But due to the S-curve and the way that exponentials work, it takes the same amount of time to go from 0 to 10 as it does to go from 10 to 90. So in Brian's opinion, Bitcoin started in 2009. In 2019, we hit 10% adoption. He thinks that by 2029, we'll have 90% adoption of Bitcoin. So he's looking at huge growth between now and 10 years from, or 7 years from now. So it's an incredible buying opportunity, is his opinion. And to back some of that up, i.e. the adoption increases that are happening, I've recently interviewed, so first of all, Farida, she was from Togo. She's no longer there. She's a political activist and talks brilliantly about something that I'd never heard of before, which is essentially the monetary system in West Africa, and what is effectively monetary imperialism. And the French government have been issuing a currency in West Africa and ex-colonial states for like a long, long time now. And they debase the currency when they feel like it. They force them to buy French products. They keep Togolese gold in Paris. Like the whole thing is like, you want to talk about criminal, like it's extraordinary what is going on there. Anyway, Farida's like, adoption here is just flying, absolutely flying. Another person I spoke to, a guy called Master Guantai, he's in Nairobi, and Kenya has its Kenyan shilling pegged to the US dollar, and similar to like an El Salvador, for example.
Right.
And he's like, you do not need to spend 5 seconds persuading people about what Bitcoin is. because they know how corrupt the country is. They know the people that run the country are corrupt. And therefore, any monetary system that has got nothing to do with them, they
Yes.
know it's a better option. And so, on a simple level, like, who's using Bitcoin? People all over the world are joining this network because it represents a far better tool than what they currently have. And I think that's extremely exciting. Like, there's another book as well I've read recently, a guy called Alex Gladstein, who's a human rights activist.
He's great.
He's very popular in the Bitcoin space. He has a book called Check Your Financial Privilege. And it's essentially a series of stories that talks about monetary, it's arguably criminal what goes on in parts of the world where, you know, governments and foreign development and aid agencies are used as a way of controlling people. It's extraordinary. And that book's brilliant for just highlighting how, you know, I have a bank account, I could get a mortgage, I could get a credit card. You know, I've never had an issue with sending money to anyone, and actually the inflation rates, generally speaking, being sub 10% my whole life. So I have a problem, basically. But that is financial privilege. And so when you end up in places where the inflation rate is extraordinarily high, you don't know if you're going to get your money out of the bank because it's a bank run and they've just frozen all your assets, or you name it, then Bitcoin, you don't need to sell it to these people. It makes sense straight away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool.
Yes, and plus a lot of Africans have no access to banks as well. So a mobile phone is their bank now. So
Yeah.
they're sovereign. Is that true?
Yeah, Rishi, I spoke to recently in Guatemala. Am I going to get this wrong? 60% are unbanked. But
wow.
There are twice the amount of mobile phones there are than people. So like
in Africa.
No, this is Guatemala.
Oh, Guatemala.
Smartphone adoption, there's 2 smartphones for every 1 person, but traditional banking services still haven't reached half the country.
Wow.
So like, you can see where this is going. It's just so obvious, right?
It is obvious it'd be interesting to see per age group, because you're 35?
34.
34. Yeah. Just trying to work that out quickly from your birth.
That's right.
So it's easy for you guys because you've grown up with technology, you know how to use it, everything like that.
It's more intuitive, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas people, like, none of my friends know about Bitcoin. Like, they know Bitcoin, but they think it's stupid. So it's hard to get my age group over the line.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I went saying earlier, you know, if you don't get it, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
I know, but I'm like,
I mean, 50 is not quite boomer. Like,
it is not a boomer.
No, it's not.
My teenage son tells me I'm a boomer all the time.
No, I think that's unfair. Like, boomers literally like the 60, 70 age.
No, boomers are like 59.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So it's 60-ish roughly.
Yeah.
And as a generation, they have, by chance, ridden like the biggest bull market in equities.
Yeah.
And so, like, whether they owned a property from 1982 or they own some Shell shares or whatever, like, it's been an amazing way of accumulating wealth over time. If you're 30 and you've got student debt and you've got credit card debt and you want to buy a house and you don't have demonstrative affordability, so you can't get, you know, fuck all debt, it's now, I think, like, in a lot of like expensive cities, it's about 10x. The average property price is 10x the average salary. Whereas in 1975, it was only 3 to 1, something like that. So the things that we actually want to buy in life, i.e. a house to live in, have become 3 or 4 times more unaffordable than they were when 1971 is when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard officially and you know, created the latest kind of fiat currency monetary system that we live within. It's very interesting looking into the history of that. There's a brilliant website called What the Fuck Happened in 1971 that just has a load of macro information that shows how productivity levels, how affordability, how purchasing power, how unemployment, all these different metrics have been like smashed, and inequalities got way worse. And yeah, it's very interesting to have a look through some of it actually. Um, yeah, so in terms of getting through to people who are like 50, 60 years old, they don't have the same problem because they're often like wealthier by chance, or the system did well for them in that sense. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, correct me, because I'm not friends with enough 50-year-olds to be honest. I'd like to know more, but
Oh, dagger to the heart. You know, some are, some aren't. But don't you think if Bitcoin does go on the trajectory that you are saying,
yeah.
that that's going to disappear?
Oh yeah, no, they'll be using it without even realizing.
Yeah.
It's so another example I was given recently is called, you know, if you were making a phone call long distance, you had to pay for it, right? You remember this, right?
Yeah.
So my first mobile phone, this would be 2004, something like that, Nokia 2110. You'd get pay as you go. Orange was the mobile network in the UK that I had. You'd get £10 on there and you could make a few phone calls and text some people. And here we are, whatever that is, almost 20 years later, and international phone calls anywhere in the world, anytime, any length, free. Why is that? Well, essentially, mobile networks got disintermediated by the internet, and something called VoIP was created. It's called Voice over Internet Protocol, and you could place phone calls for free using that.
Yeah.
Now, when I make a WhatsApp call around the world, I don't know that I'm using VoIP. I just use it.
Okay.
And when a 50-year-old wants to send money to their child in, you know, a different country in 5 years' time, and they send it for a fraction of the cost at 10 times the speed, at like, you know, 10x the easiness, so the user experience is better, the speed, the cost, they won't know they're using Bitcoin, but they were. So, and that to me is how technology adoption really works. It doesn't necessarily, because that's where so many questions at this stage. What is blockchain? What is Bitcoin? Who created it? Why is it important? These are all very analytical questions that early adopters have, people who are inquisitive have, people who are like arrogant and not interested. You know, the system works fine, leave us alone. But there'll become a point where like the mass market, they don't care. They just use it. So that will happen in my opinion.
I suppose I feel a bit responsible to sort of try and educate people because like our mutual friend Peter, he always says, you get the price you deserve.
Yeah.
And I sort of think, well, not really, because it's just luck that you go down these rabbit holes or life experiences. So I do feel like I need to sort of like get the information out there, sort of tell people about it.
Sure.
But it is hard because I feel like I'm up against a brick wall a lot of the time. So, but what would you suggest, like for resources or a book? I mean, obviously your podcast.
Yeah, Bitcoin with Jake.
Yeah. So join that. But where would you start? Like,
well, okay. First of all, the phrase "you get the price you deserve" can be read two ways. One, it can be a really like, ha ha, sucker, you get what you deserve for being ignorant or being arrogant or, you know, being a stick your head in the sand and not, you know, do anything kind of, you know, you deserve it. Or you can flip that around and say you get the price you deserve, because in my experience, actually there's a lot of quite hard work that goes into getting it. Like, what is Bitcoin? And especially when you're someone like myself that is inheriting money, has a pot of money to look after, don't fuck it up, boy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, seriously, you really care a lot about the success of the decision-making processes you make. And therefore you put a lot of pressure on yourself, right? Don't fuck it up. So how do you know you're making the right decision? Well, you have to work, read, listen, watch, and, you know, slowly but surely through your study, you start to build a picture and you start to understand things more. And so if you've understood it enough to make a big bet, and that's what it is, like any investment is a bet at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you cannot tell the future. But you're hoovering this stuff up today at what you see as incredible value. Well, maybe you deserve it because you worked hard and you worked out what it was, and you worked out why it was important, and you had a very good guess that the probability of its success was very high. And I like that. So it sounds like a sarky, ha ha, you get what you deserve, but actually you can flip it the other way and look at it in a nice way. In terms of where to even start, I mean, I think I'd refer back to that concept of like, what problem are you solving for this person? So
Mm.
the context of this individual and where you think you might kind of grab their attention. It's all about asking questions. It is not, in my opinion, about telling people what's what. What is,
Mm.
why is an inflationary monetary theory important? What is debt? What is a long-term debt cycle? What are currencies? What is an investment? Why is it important to store value over time? What does it mean to own something? I personally find that way more engaging than, you need to own Bitcoin. If you don't, you're fucked. You know what I mean? Like, and that, because that's so obvious to me. But I mean, on my website, bitcoinwithjake.com, I've got, gosh, I haven't totaled up the amount of hours it is at this point, but I've got a list of things you can listen, read, and watch.
Yeah.
And that is podcasts, YouTubes, articles, books that I've consumed in the last kind of few years. So that's a fairly handy starting point. I mean, basically, podcasts are amazing. I've learned
Mm.
so much from people just sharing conversations. And there are some excellent podcasts out there that are specifically focused on Bitcoin. Um, I guess, I have to mention the Bitcoin Standard. It's just a brilliant book, um, which I read at some stage in the last couple of years, and that helped me to understand, monetary history. Like, I didn't really look into this before. Like, where did money start from? Why was it important? But actually, it turns out there's a lot more books out there than just Bitcoin Standard. That's a famous one, but there's also some smaller ones, more entry level. There's a whole load of history of people. Actually, money's something that's been studied for so long, and it was a niche area of economics that, unsurprisingly, the money printer funded institutions of today, they don't teach you about this stuff. Um,
Well, that's
so
what yeah, that's what
it's
I found.
keep an open mind, go
Mm.
down the rabbit hole, see where it takes you, and there are some really cool things to discover. And I find, so this particular subject touches on everything: economics, history, human rights, mental health, technology. There's all these different subjects that get interwound into what this actual technology is, and therefore, in my mind, it has something for everyone. They just
Mm.
haven't worked out that the passion that they have, like sustainability. This is such a big subject at the moment. I went very heavily down the sustainability rabbit hole. Invested in some clean tech startups. Was looking for technologies that could help us meet our Paris agreements, regulations of 2050 and all this stuff. I'm now of the opinion that Bitcoin is the most important technology there is when it comes to long-term sustainability and resource depletion.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and that's largely because of time preference. I don't know if you looked into time preference in relation to
I've
Bitcoin.
heard of it, but
Yeah, so the simple concept being, today you get paid $100.
mm.
Because of the inflationary environment we live in, we know that $100 might be 1% of the money supply today. And so it therefore buys you $100 worth of stuff today. But
Yeah.
next year, they might inflate this money supply by 10%. So suddenly you earn less than 1% of the money supply, which means that you can't buy $100 worth of stuff in terms of purchasing power a year from now. You can only buy $90 worth of stuff. So
Okay.
you're incentivized to pay today rather than wait and save. And this is an instinctive reaction to an inflationary monetary system, which means that basically all of us are incentivized to think very short term because of the money that we're using. Whereas when you have Bitcoin, which is a deflationary monetary asset that goes up in purchasing power over time because of the fixed cap, and the counteract of that fixed cap to productivity gains, which is essentially technology deployment, creates faster, quicker, cheaper, harder things, like VoIP, like I mentioned before. Like,
Mm.
technology is always improving it. Prices go up. It doesn't make sense. Prices should come down over time.
Yeah.
So sustainability is a massive subject, and for some reason, a lot of the clean tech heads, they haven't looked at Bitcoin. They listen to the big articles that say it uses the same amount of energy as Ireland. Well, it's actually the same amount of energy as all washers in the world, or dryers, I think it is. So the metrics are all wrong, right? It's literally the central banks and the status quo sending out as much misinformation as they can, so people don't read about it. They just write it off. Oh, I'm interested in sustainability. I'm not interested in Bitcoin. Bad for the environment. Why? Have you ever heard of time preference? What would it mean if we had a deflationary monetary system when it comes to long-term resource depletion? Like, you can see Bitcoin is all around you. Start making more long-term decisions. They look after their health more. They change their diet. They start saving. They stop being so hedonistic, and they don't do as many drugs or drink as much. These are the type of impacts that will happen to people within society that make decisions about, should we create that mine? Should we dig up that oil? Could we become more productive? Is that a good use of capital? So it's a whole psychological change towards how we interact with each other. I think we haven't even scratched the surface of what it means.
And it does open your eyes to different things. Like, as soon as you get Bitcoin, like, it's a two-edged sword. Like, you can see other things that people can't see. So what is if you had to like give me one like aspect of Bitcoin that you love the most? Like, for me, I love that my Bitcoin is safely in Texas, in a vault. It gives me security that I can just like leave and go to Texas if I want to.
Yeah.
That's what I love. What's the one aspect that you love? Not money price go up.
Yeah, number go up. I don't have one thing. It's such a big question. I guess what springs to mind is, so I was put in a very, very difficult situation as a young man, where my father had died young, unexpectedly, and I suddenly was in a very, very difficult position financially. Well, no, there was just a lot of responsibility on my shoulders that was unforeseen, and I had some big decisions to make. And there are lots of people out there that will tell you how to invest, but they take no risk. So, a stockbroker makes a percentage on your purchase. They don't necessarily make money if it goes up or down. A wealth manager will take a 1% fee on an annual basis, regardless of performance. You might sack them because it's poor, but they still get paid. You might go and buy a piece of real estate. You pay the real estate agent a brokerage fee, but the value of the market drops, or you get the leverage wrong and you mess up the debt structure. The broker for the mortgage, they also get paid, but they don't have any upside or downside with it. So I think Bitcoin is going to revolutionize family wealth management, and it enables we've had to become basically, semi-professional fucking investors to work out how to keep our money, whereas you don't have to do that any longer. You have to buy Bitcoin, you have to put it in self-custody, you have to sit on it, and you will make the best investment you could possibly make. It is only yours, and you don't have to give any fucking weasels your money that take no risk with you. It is yours to keep. And that would probably be how do I summarize that? The wealth management paradigm for families has been simplified and improved because you can now buy and own Bitcoin.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, Jake. That was fantastic. Pleasure. It was really great. And I'll talk soon.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Sonia, very much.
Thanks. Bye.